same thing. I'm going to come at a slightly different perspective on a few concepts, or a few ideas that I'm hoping might tease out some thinking for you. Background for me, about 35 years in the ICT industry, as Malcolm mentioned. I've been based in Singapore for a while now. I left Microsoft as of the 8th of March, which is where Malcolm and I had most of our interaction. So I'm kind of trying to deprogram myself right now. And this was supposed to be my gardening leave, but 11th of March I decided I was going to move into my own company, which my wife has been pushing me to do for a while anyway. But having said that, I'm going to try and take some of the information and distill some of the information from the 10 years of working around the Asian market. I apologise up front. I know most of you are Australian, or dealing with Australian councils or businesses related to local government here. A lot of the work that I've been doing is around Asia, so I'm going to drag up some examples of that, but I'm hoping that those might be able to be used in the context of being able to give you some ideas about some of the things that you can do probably in a more mature way. When I think of innovation, for instance, innovation is done in a variety of different ways across Asia, and largely because of the different kinds of issues that we're dealing with. I keep on reminding some of the folk that I've been dealing with over the last 10 years in Redmond that Asia, the area that I was covering, which includes Australia of course, is half of the world's population. But having said that, there's a huge diversity of some of the issues and challenges, socioeconomic standings, etc. Clicker. No, it's on. Can you give me help? That'll do. Okay, so in fact I'll use this. This one works as well, doesn't it? Doesn't? Okay. So I think Orlando mentioned some of these themes this morning, and these are kind of the four main mega trends that we're seeing that's driving a lot of what we do across the industry today. So cloud is one. It's been around for a few years. I certainly have a bit of a sceptical view on cloud, in as much as it's sort of the new buzzword, the new idea, and all the rest of it for a lot. We've actually been doing some of this stuff for many years anyway. But the other side of it is, in the context of what I want to talk to you in relation to citizen services, I think it provides the glue that attaches a lot of the things that we do. And we've talked a lot this morning about apps and application development, and I'm going to touch on some of that later. And when we look at some of the social networking tools that we use, most of those social networking tools are in fact cloud-based services. Big data has been talked about a little bit, in aggregation of data, and certainly from public sector point of view, there are some interesting examples of where that's being used. And one of the concepts or ideas from Singapore is they've quite a while had a ticketing system for the public transport system, and they actually use that same ticketing system across buses, rail, taxis, even public car parks. So it's all RFID. Even the tollways use exactly the same smart card. Some of the banks have zeroed in on that and are using a Visa card that actually has the embedded chip in there, so that you can auto top up the card, and that's one of the ones that I use. So I never have to worry about topping up my card to be able to use the public transport system. And I think Orlando mentioned it this morning around consumerisation. Well, he actually mentioned mobility. I'm taking that a little bit further in terms of consumerisation of IT. Many of you, I'm sure, are carrying 1, 2, 3, perhaps even more devices that you're interacting with on a daily basis. And I think when I talked this morning and asked the question about communications infrastructure, I want to put that in a little bit of context. I think cities have a great opportunity to be able to provide access and mobility solutions So most of us have been talking about NBN services and wired services to the home. What I was trying to drive at this morning is I think a lot of those services are actually enabled by being able to have ubiquitous access to information on the devices where you are, so that you have this vision or the ability to realise government services at your fingertips, as well as a lot of the other services that you want to have access to. People's expectations are changing. Now, I think when we look at the young in our community, they're far more adept and interested in driving social networking tools. They're less concerned about things like privacy. They're going to use a whole variety of different tools to do it. So it's not acceptable now to be able to do online banking using the devices you have and not be able to integrate with government using those same tools. I think the other thing that's really accelerating the pace a lot is this whole notion of adoption. There's some very interesting statistics on that, and I'll leave you to read those, some of those statistics. But I think the young in our community that will start to be, of course, the next executives and all the rest of it, are really driving some of that pace of change and that adoption of those services. I guess the challenge for us in a public sector environment is really balancing, innovation and integrating with the community. I'm going to touch on the integration aspect a little bit in a while, as well as managing the costs associated with it, particularly when you're starting to look at some of the high technology relevant devices and all the rest of it, and how you manage to balance that, the potential cost of providing those access to those services. Innovation, of course, as I've already mentioned, occurs in a variety of different ways. And I think the interesting thing for me is going to these sorts of hackathons that are being run and seeing how some of our young are actually driving innovation and solving problems in a very, very different way, largely because they're not necessarily programmed in the same traditional ways. And I see this a lot across Asia, that suddenly problems are solved in a very, very different way because of the conditions that people have to put in, and the assumptions that aren't being met by reasonable access to tools and resources locally. We hear this one quite commonly, open, and in the context of this presentation it was going to be a little bit about open data. In fact, I really want to talk more about the importance of actually being open, and I'd actually drive you to start thinking more about how you better integrate with the community and the benefits of doing that integration. Governments in the past have been typically built around silos or agencies. And it's been quite a cultural shift to try and break down those barriers. And in some of the countries that I've still been dealing with, there are still very distinct agencies that will not talk to each other and will not communicate with each other. At a city level and at a provincial government level or a local government level, of course, that's been a lot easier to deal with. And I think Hugh mentioned that earlier on in the discussions around Canberra. And I think the ability here in the Gold Coast to be able to start driving that. But there is a big benefit in really getting that model right and being able to not only deal with your own agencies, but being able to deal with the community more broadly. Lorenzo Madrid, who some of you may know, is one of the people in Microsoft's worldwide team. He did an interesting study around e-government, and the work that he did was really looking at the cost of citizens actually going to individual agencies and being bounced to another agency, and he reflected that in the effect on GDP. I'm quite happy to link you up if you send me an email with Lorenzo and you'd like to get some of the information on that. But I was in the Philippines not so long back, and it's quite relevant when you start looking at this. And his view is balanced against mature and some of the more emerging or undeveloped markets as well. But one of the cities in the Philippines, for instance, has citizens line up at 9 a.m. in the morning. They might get to the front of the queue at 2 a.m. in the afternoon. and realise that they've got the wrong information and have to start the whole process all over again. Now, admittedly, there's a different cost in, in citizens not actually necessarily being productive in that environment compared to here in Australia, but it's still an issue in terms of how you look at providing some of those services. Orlando also mentioned this morning, I guess, in terms of some of the provision of citizen services, I want to come at this in looking at these five category areas. Some of the ideas or concepts that you can use to drive citizen services in the delivery of your services in local government. Location, of course, is a fairly common one. It's about providing personalised service. We've got examples across the globe of the use of language-based services, of GPS data being published out and actually creating, a rich form of problem reporting and the like. But who here speaks Vietnamese? Anyone? So I've spent a lot of time going to Hanoi last year, and God forbid if somebody fell down in front of me having a heart attack, there is no way known, one, that I would know the telephone number, and two, be able to ring somebody up if I could find the telephone number and be able to, get the emergency services out there. And as Hugh mentioned this morning, there are applications out there for these services, and I encourage you to look at those. And we did a lot of work before I left Microsoft around tourism and looking at the constituent, who was the citizen, in the context of, say, a tourist or a visit to an area, and also a citizen consuming a lot of those services. And location featured, as well as some of these other services, being fairly high on the list in terms of how you provide some very rewarding experiences. And a lot of these are cloud services that you can make or utilise, and some of the developers can utilise to deliver those services. The other one is cloud. Cloud tends to be a bit of a scary place for a lot of people in public sector, and I'm not going to debate the whole issue around data sovereignty or or any of the issues around the Patriot Act and all those sorts of things, which are policy minefields in themselves. But what I will say is there is a great opportunity when you start looking at application development work to be able to utilise the cloud in a far more intelligent way to be able to provide the glue that brings those applications together. And as I mentioned, social networking actually does largely is really cloud services based. This is a slide that I've been using for a number of years actually. In fact, it's probably one of the first iterations. So we talked about New York, I think, this morning. Vancouver actually published out their open data catalogue a number of years ago. I think I've been using this slide for about 3 years. So there are organisations out there that have actually gone and published this and are getting some benefits out of doing that. So I guess in terms of my open statements, that's the sort of thing that I'm encouraging. And I do applaud, I guess the approach in terms of being able to look at releasing some of the data out and better and tighter integration with the business community. Here's another example. This is some work that Microsoft did with the European Union. They have, and it's purely a cloud-based service here. They had a whole range of environmental monitoring devices that they basically connected up to a cloud-based service to publish the data. What's interesting about this is that citizens are actually able to provide feedback on how these devices may be either in error and need repair by providing feedback mechanisms through the social networking tools. So they were kind of self-checking in many respects. Social, as I've mentioned, there's some interesting concepts around the use of social networking tools and how it's found its way into some of our public sector examples as well. There is no doubt that politicians have been using social networking tools, obviously for marketing campaigns, but I guess creating when policy frameworks are put in place, there's a great benefit in providing tighter and much more rapid citizen services around the use of these tools. And interestingly, I'm finding that when we look across the globe, there's some interesting examples of perhaps Twitter being used. So volunteer fire services in the US, rather than handing out portable radio devices, the volunteer fire officers already have phones, so they're using Twitter to actually report back information to the communication centre. Benefit of that, of course, is that the Twitter feeds are public feeds, and and the press are not pestering the communication centre to find out what the status of the fire front and the like is. City of Wassel, I think in the UK, has the snow device, snowmobiles going through, actually laying down salt, gritters, and they've got this thing called the Twitter gritter. You, as a citizen, you can find out when when that particular snow vehicle is going to be going through there to clear out the snow. This one, I'm sure, is not common here in the Gold Coast at all, but it's what I wanted to talk to you about in the context of what happens if you don't start to embrace some of these tools. MySociety.org is a UK not-for-profit organisation, and it's a bunch of citizens that really got together. And if you go to MySociety.org, it's actually a very interesting site. There are a whole range of services that citizens have written and published out there to provide some very simple applications, web-based applications that can be used. In this one, Fix My Street is being used to report potholes in streets, or perhaps rubbish collection or abandoned vehicles, etc., street lights out. The city of Lewisham in the UK actually created this Love Clean Streets. They took a slightly different approach and actually put in an application. So rather than being, I guess, brutalised and challenged, by the general populace, they took the approach of actually building an application around that. And there is a company in Spain, in Barcelona, called Spenta, and Spenta have actually effectively this Love Clean Streets application that is run out of a cloud service. And in fact, I've watched them provision that for customers in around about 1.5 minutes. It's a very, very simple application. Interfaces to mobile phones, and basically allows you to take photographs, publish the photographs, and be able to use the social networking feeds to get reports of how the progress on the repair is. The other one, and I guess I mentioned before about all of the devices that we tend to have access to these days. And it was interesting, I was talking to one of my Microsoft colleagues a couple of years ago when the first iterations of Windows 8 was in development, and he sent me this, this screenshot of Windows 8, and he said, "Isn't this great?" And I said, "Yes, but the operating system's irrelevant." And the fact of the matter is, for me, I don't look at an operating system, and I'm assuming many of you don't. You have an expectation about what it's actually going to provide. It's really now about what you can do with it. It's about the applications that run. This is why it's so important, I think, to get this message, quite right. And here, there are a range of applications that I'm sure some of you have already played with. Here are a number of applications that are being published out by government. And I think last count in Singapore government had 187 iOS applications that had been written and they had published out there. The challenge, of course, for this is not only getting the applications built, but it's how do you turn around and identify the right applications for what you do. And what's the model and the role of government in turning around and taking on board those applications that may be sitting in the marketplace and determining which ones you think are appropriate for your particular community, your council or city. The model that I'm showing you here is really about sort of aggregating that data and providing the data mart. And I don't know that any mayor that I've ever come across that didn't want some form of a dashboard to be able to see their business. And this is an example of a dashboard called Push BI by Extended Results out of the US. But it basically interrogates the data mart to provide a simple drill-down view of some of the metrics that a city mayor would want to have access to. I think the interesting thing is here, as we start to look at publishing out the open data, then we have the application developers able to therefore create solutions and deliver some of those problems for and on behalf of government, and are remunerated for that. And I think if you get that model working right here, given the fact that the marketplace is a global marketplace, there is an opportunity for a developer in the Gold Coast to actually have the same application used by other governments across the globe. The last one that I want to really touch on is really this concept of natural user interface. I mean, you saw the video this morning, that great video with the garden and all the concepts and ideas. The point that Orlando made is a lot of that stuff is actually here now. It's really about how you embrace those technologies and how you utilize those technologies to drive, better citizen services. And I think the challenge also is, for most of us, we'd be looking at this and saying, you know what, how do we utilize augmented reality? There are kids out there that are already playing with this stuff right now. And for us, it might be seen as a real cost and something that's a little bit scary. For a lot of our young developers, they're doing that outside the province of government, perhaps in the universities as well, or privately in their, in their shed, and developing a lot of these. And there are some interesting ways that some of the technology is being used. I think voice and touch is being, a very common interface. This one is a variation. Most of you would have seen, Connect Console and related that perhaps to, to a gaming facility. This is an example of Connect actually being used in Canada, in one of the hospitals there, to allow surgeons in surgery to be able to manipulate data and not be able to have to worry about touching anything and therefore contaminating their environment. The other one is the early days of Surface, and I've seen this used a lot in in a tourism setting. Tables that have actually been created where you can manipulate some of the data or seek information, public kiosk areas and the like that are being used for getting information. This one is an example out of Seoul in Korea, and it's a bit of a pilot that they were doing up there where they've actually created a 7-Eleven on the side of the train or the transit system. So the idea here is that you've got your mobile phone, you go and have a look at the virtual shelves, and you use either near-field communications or barcodes and actually order products and have it returned to your home, when you take the train back that evening. I guess the message here is that not only is there a technology benefit out of doing this, but there is also an opportunity that I think local governments have understood for a long time, and that is the power of integration with the business community that's perhaps more challenged at a national government level because of policy issues. So that's really all I wanted to cover off in my particular session. I really want to challenge you to start thinking about what your technology environment is right now and what you can potentially do to move that dial using some of the concepts or ideas that we've had, that I'm showing here. How can you start to build and engage more broadly, take down the barriers if you're a government organisation, and work with the business community, work with the associations to start charting out that that runway for the future. Thank you very much.